Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Vianora Vinca. We're coming to you again this week from the studio at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. Ebony and Jet magazines are the two most iconic publications in the history of black media in this country. Inner City Broadcasting is a giant in the world of black-owned radio. Now, these mainstays of black media face serious financial problems, and their futures are in question. On this edition of Independent Sources, commemorating Black History Month, we look at the state of black-owned media as these companies search for ways to survive. And we hear why two distinctly different communities have formed an alliance for immigration reform. We'll have those stories and news of the week after this.
Ethnic media, I think, gives a voice, a comfortable and familiar voice to people in their specific communities.
John H. Johnson founded Johnson Publishing Company nearly 70 years ago. Percy Sutton launched Inner City Broadcasting almost 40 years ago. Both men were pioneers in black-owned media, and both companies have lost their legendary leaders. As black culture moves closer to being mainstream culture, can black-owned media companies survive? To discuss this topic, Danny Bakewell of the National Newspaper Publishers Association joins me from New Orleans via Skype. His organization represents community newspapers. And joining us by phone from Washington, D.C. is Richard Prince. He writes a column about diversity in the news industry. Danny and Richard, welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get into our conversation, let's take a look at this backgrounder Abi Ishola filed on Johnson Publishing, the parent company of Ebony and Jet.
Iconic, historic, groundbreaking. Those are some terms used to describe Ebony Magazine, one of the many brands under Johnson Publishing. In 1942, the late John Johnson established the business in Chicago with a $500 loan from the bank. Soon after, it emerged as the largest black-owned publishing company in the world.
In 1979, all these folks were top financial institutions. And
Ron Howell, journalism professor at Brooklyn College, was an editor at Ebony in the late 60s. He says the publication was one of the first to feature positive images of blacks in Hollywood, the financial sector, and other prestigious professions.
I was part of the first group, really, I think, of blacks going into mainstream media, especially newspapers. So things were beginning to change even then, but there was this sense of Ebony and Jet really as being the national publication of the black community.
But Ebony's heyday has long passed. Last year, reports surfaced that Johnson Publishing, also the publisher of Jet magazine, was battling financial troubles. Ebony's advertising revenue dropped by over 35% from 2008 to 2009, according to data from the Publishers Information Bureau. These financial troubles led the company to cancel last year's Ebony Fashion Fair tour, the company's acclaimed mobile fashion show launched by Johnson's late wife, Eunice Johnson, over 50 years ago. Pop culture blogger Patrick Riley says the news was a blow.
It was really just an opportunity to see people of color in their glory, just at their best, dressed to the nines, which is so much a part of our history that never quite got mainstreamed out there.
Representatives at Johnson Publishing didn't return requests for comment for this report. However, it's been reported that Linda Johnson Rice, chairman and CEO and daughter of John Johnson, is quietly looking for a buyer or investor for Ebony. If acquired, there's a possibility that the magazine would no longer be black-owned.
We've seen it happen before. Time Inc. is now Essence. Vibe in all of its varied incarnations became exactly BT, Viacom. So to those ends, that's basically what is happening right now in this economy and in our corporate culture. I would hope that if Ebony and Jet are purchased by something bigger and maybe something that is not black owned, I would hope that the right advisors, creatively speaking, were and will still be a part of the brand.
That may not be enough for Black consumers. In the past, many have not taken well to Black-owned media being bought out by non-Black entities. I asked a few people in Harlem what they think.
Being that John Henry Johnson started that company, I'm sure he's turning over his grave right now, considering what the situation is. I really don't understand it, but I disagree with it. They should try to find other alternative ways of making sure that that magazine stays alive.
I've only known Ebony and Jet to be Black-owned, and that's all I'm familiar with. And it continues to take the struggle away of having entrepreneurs who are Black to pursue Black things, and that would be crushing if that actually happened.
For Independent Sources, Abi Ishola.
Danny, let me start with you. How significant is it for the publications at this point in time whether or not ownership stays Black?
Well, I think obviously for Linda, in terms of selling it, I mean, I think she would prefer for it to be in Black hands, but it becomes a critical business decision to be able to sell the publication, if that is accurate that she is trying to sell it, and I think it is. She has to consummate a sale, because if she doesn't, then there's so many other things that could go wrong. You wouldn't want the publication to go out of business. So you have that element. But I think this is a woman that's tried and true. The legacy of her father is at stake. She would love to have it in the hands of a Black entrepreneur, a major Black investment company, something of that sort. But again, at the end of the day, it's a business decision. But the thing that I really want to focus on is the fact that part of the problem with Ebony Jet or Johnson Publication is that it's not getting the advertising revenues that it deserves to get, given the kind of market share that it has and the appeal that it has to Black people. I mean, you have all of these major white companies in America who really have their profits, many of them, on the backs of Black people and the Black economy, yet they do not find it necessary to invest and advertise and give any kind of respect or reciprocation to Black media outlets. I mean, Ebony Jet is the creme de la creme of our industry, of our media industry. You can talk about the fact that publications are on the brink, and newspapers are going out of business, but they're not out of business now. And if these magazines, specifically talking about Ebony and Jet, were getting the reciprocal advertising commensurate with the kind of monies that Black people put in these companies, like Ford, like GM, like you name it, some of these fashion products that are out there, that company wouldn't be on the brink of going out of business. And that's what we have to look at. This is economic racism that exists against Black media.
And Richard, you have a blog on which you wrote about the possible future owner of Ebony and Jet, and you've talked about Magic Johnson being interested in the publications. What's the latest on that?
Well, there is no latest. Linda Johnson Rice has not commented, except to say through a spokeswoman that she has never talked to Magic Johnson with respect to his interest in buying the company, which means that if there had been discussions, they were below her level. So that's all we know. In terms of the the business about whether Ebony would be bought and who's advertising it and that kind of thing, it is significant to note that Ebony is still the largest Black targeted publication in terms of magazines, even though circulation and advertising revenue has fallen. But it's also important to note where is that, who is buying the magazine, who is subscribing to it. Are they the people that advertisers desire? When I pick up a copy of magazines that skew much younger, such as rap magazines or Vibe, I see plenty of ads. Because those are a more desirable demographic to advertisers than Ebony and Jet, perhaps, which have the reputation of being for older people and your father's and mother's generation. So I think that's part of the problem, is are they the right demographic for advertisers?
Well, speaking of that, Richard, the JET has just come out with a new design. They plan to revamp their look online and in print. What do you make of that decision?
Well, I think, as somebody said, that it's always good to make your publications look good if you're trying to sell them. Just like as if you're trying to sell your house, you want it to be good to look good to prospective buyers. But JET has a particular problem in that it has a lag time of more than a week before it comes out, meaning that it can only be so topical, and that's very important in this age of the internet when you can get news instantly. Imagine having to wait for more than a week to find out what Tiger Woods said in his public appearance on Friday. It just wouldn't do. But that's the situation that JET finds itself in, and Ebony, being a monthly, certainly has to delay any kind of breaking news like that, and then not putting money into the internet. They do have a website, yes, ebonyjet.com, but there's so many other news sources out here that give you news instantaneously and are pouring more resources into the web, such as The Root, Griot, Black Voices, BET.com, etc., that they're really up against stiff competition if they're not going to put the money in to compete toe-to-toe with them.
Danny and Richard, let's turn to the problems facing another major black-owned media company. Inner City Broadcasting is the second largest radio broadcasting company targeting African Americans. Its founder, Percy Sutton, died recently, but even before his death, Inner City faced some formidable financial troubles. Let's take a look at this report by Garry Pierre-Pierre.
Leadership has to have followers. To be a leader, you must have followers. One of the best ways to evaluate whether you're truly a leader is the kind of organization you build, how many people you influence to do something.
Percy Sutton stood tall even in a city filled with outsized personalities. He built one of the largest black-owned media companies in the country from the bottom up. On January 6, Sutton was laid to rest, and his funeral drew thousands to Manhattan's Riverside Church. There, politicos, entrepreneurs, and celebrities converged to pay tribute.
Stand on your feet and show your love for person. Put your hands together. Put your hands together. Show your love, show your thanks, your appreciation, your joy. Even when he was a multi-millionaire, a media mogul, on radio stations all over the country, had reopened the Apollo, was accepted in the White House and in any place of great significance. Even with all of that, he laid down in front of the police headquarters and let them handcuff him for a West African boy he never knew.
Ironically, as Sutton was lauded for what he had built, on that frigid January morning, his empire was on the verge of being torn down. In December 2009, attorneys for a group of shareholders filed a suit against Sutton and Inner City Broadcasting, seeking $80 million. The plaintiffs, Hugh Wyatt and Chester Redhead, accused Sutton and Inner City Broadcasting of looting the company of its cash and assets. The company's largest creditor, Goldman Sachs, is also asking for payment on nearly $230 million in debt. Things got worse for Inner City when the Treasury Department denied the Congressional Black Caucus's request to bail the company out of its financial woes. Many people expect Inner City to emerge out of these challenges.
The question is, what's the legacy plan that he put in place? I don't know that, but someone surely does. What is the legacy plan? Who has been put in place, and I'm sure that person's already there, to carry forth his vision and to move that company forward.
In many ways, the problems facing Inner City Broadcasting mirrors those facing black radio in general.
Black radio in particular, I think, has really missed a lot of opportunity. I think, number one, there has been a significant need, I believe, for African American news and information content. And again, radio is an inexpensive proposition compared to the other media.
Jackson says that too much of black radio is about the personality of the host and not about the community.
And without that journalistic backbone, you're not going to have, I think, the necessary approach to make a public affairs program, ask the right questions, speak for a pluralistic African American community.
That's very important.
That's very important. And so I think there's some what would you call it? There's some holes in the view. There's some blind spots.
For independent sources, I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre.
Danny, do you agree with the point that one of the main reasons leading to the decline of inner city broadcasting has been the fact that the radio stations lacked clear identity?
I think inner city broadcasting, I think they certainly have a clear identity in New York. There's a myriad of things there. Again, I think a lot of this gets down to advertising. It gets down to, political issues. Inner city broadcasting, obviously, as many other media outlets are facing a crisis today. For me, what I focus on is the fact that, America is giving everybody a bailout and an opportunity to restructure their business, but they wouldn't provide that same opportunity for inner city broadcasting. And it just seems to me that, it's always good for the goose, but it's not good for the gander. Black people always come out of these situations in a way that, we get penalized even when we make progress. As was said earlier about Ebony Jet, it's still the #1, magazine that focuses on Black people. There are a lot of other people trying to come into the market and to penetrate that market. But, these are tried and true instruments, and we ought to try to keep them alive.
And Danny, we're hearing reports, as pointed out in the piece, of internal disputes over who's going to be leading inner city broadcasting. What does it mean for the company not having leadership in place at this point in time?
Well, I don't know that that's true. I would be just speculating in a vacuum. I think Pepe Sutton is heading up inner city broadcasting at this point. I think he's trying to restructure his debt. He's trying to, as was just said by my colleague, in their heyday, they were the #1 voice of Black radio, not in terms of talk, but just in terms of music. They were the premier, media outlet, certainly in New York. They wouldn't have gotten all that money invested in them if they were not. So, as is many other media outlets, they've hit a snag. They want an opportunity to readjust. I don't think we should speculate beyond what we know. As far as I'm concerned, obviously, all of this is going to depend upon management. Whoever putting the money in there is going to want to know that there's solid management decisions that are being made. As far as I know, they have a good management team. How it needs to be restructured, I couldn't answer that.
We'll have to leave it at that. Danny Bakewell in New Orleans and Richard Prince in Washington. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, here's Abi Ishola with some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. From New America Media, recent studies show that ethnic minorities over age 50 have less access to treatment for mental illness than older whites. The studies link this trend to poverty, little to no insurance, and lack of programs geared towards ethnic elders. From World Journal, a new report finds that the federal immigration court system is being slammed with cases and reaching a crisis point. The law firm, Arnold & Porter LLP, prepared the report for the American Bar Association. The document notes that there are only 57 immigration courts in the United States, where over 12 million undocumented immigrants live. In Texas, a registered nurse is facing 10 years behind bars after reporting a Filipino doctor to the Texas Medical Board for allegedly practicing bad medicine. Ann Mitchell has been accused of misuse of official information under the state's abuse of power statute after accusing Dr. Rolando Arafiles Jr. of improperly prescribing medication and performing bad surgeries. And finally, Hebrew language charter schools are piquing the interest of Jewish philanthropists throughout the country. The Forward reports that the Erevim Philanthropic Group will give over $500,000 to the Hebrew Language Academy in East Brunswick, New Jersey, to support the school's mission. The school does not incorporate the Jewish faith in its curriculum. Instead, it teaches Hebrew to people from different backgrounds. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to you, Vianora.
Healthcare reform may be on hold, but advocates for immigration reform say it's critical that legislation be passed before summer. The effort to push reform forward has prompted a growing political alliance between Jewish and Latino groups. With me to talk about the importance of this partnership is Gideon Aronoff of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and Angela Fernandez of the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigration Rights. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Gideon, tell us what prompted the Jewish community leaders to form this partnership with the Latino community on immigration issues.
Well, again, our community has a long-standing connection to the American immigration story and a deep commitment to building ties to other ethnic and religious communities throughout America. And working in partnership with the Latino community on such a pressing issue like immigration reform was really obvious, almost a no-brainer. And so we've been pushing to create both national activities in Washington and local activities throughout the country to promote this partnership.
Why specifically at this point in time, though?
Well, we really see this as a make or break time for immigration. It has a political logic that both with an interest in addressing the concerns of the Latino community and in solving problems. And that's one of the biggest things we see in Washington today, that the government can't solve problems. We haven't addressed health care. Hopefully that will change, but who knows? And so we see a real, both a need and a potential to succeed in addressing our complex immigration problems. And so, as the famous Jewish sage says, if not now, when? This is the time.
And Angela, why the need to form an alliance with the Jewish community on immigration reform?
Well, I think that right now, when individuals think about comprehensive immigration reform, the first image that they have in their mind is of immigrants of Latino descent. The reality is that immigrants come from all over the world, and there are many immigrants of Jewish descent that come from other parts of the world where they seek refuge here in this country. And so it's very important that that we find commonalities through that and because of that. Also, there's a long history of Jewish immigration in the United States, and one could argue, well, I guess it depends, one could argue, at least for New York City, that the Jewish immigration opened the doors for immigrants from other countries, and so I think that we have a lot to learn about the type of breakthroughs that they've made historically, both in terms of advocacy and being able to ensure that certain services and funding is brought to the newest groups. And so I think that Latinos have already also jumped through that hurdle, and it's now our responsibility jointly to now help newer immigrants that are coming into New York City.
I think Angela makes an important point, which is that we have a reason to be involved in this because of our Latino Jews and because of Jews from other parts of the world. 10% of the Jewish community is foreign born. And so we have a real hardcore, concrete stake in how this issue plays out, in addition to our religious and community building purposes for joining together with other communities.
And what does the community, the Jewish community, have to gain from this partnership exactly?
Well, again, we have very significant potential to gain both for our Jewish newcomers and for building the kinds of partnerships with other parts of our American society that we need to address an entire array of issues, foreign policy issues, care for the elderly, and we can only do this if we're able to do it in partnership with our others in our American community. And so we look at immigration both as an important issue for the Jewish community and as an important way to reach out and be part of the important issues for our partners.
And speaking of foreign policy issues, you were quoted in an article saying that through this partnership, the Hispanic community can help on issues related to Israel. Can you explain exactly how?
Sure. Issues relating to Israel are crucially important to the Jewish community, something that we are trying to build ties throughout all of the different socioeconomic, religious, ethnic components of our American society. To do that, we can't sit in a cocoon. We have to be engaged with a full array of issues that are concerned to our partners. And so we do this as in part because this is a way that we can build the kinds of relationships that are the foundation for joint work on an array of other issues, including issues relating to Israel.
And Angela, what's been the sentiment within the Hispanic community about this alliance?
I think that, well, for example, our organization is based in Washington Heights. There is a large Dominican community there and a large Jewish community there. And I think that this actually is a very good opportunity for us to strengthen the bonds that exist, or strengthen the bonds through the neighborhood. Secondly, our organization works with the New York Immigration Coalition, where they have many Jewish American member organizations, and we are continuously working together on pushing immigration reform. And so, I guess to answer your question, I mean, it just benefits all groups if we can work together and pool our resources to hopefully have immigration reform.
Can I add just what we always look to what are the principles, the foundations, the ethics underlying everything. And one important idea is the idea that I am my brother and my sister's keeper, that we must take responsibility for ourselves. And so at the smallest local level in Washington Heights, or the largest local level, really, which is our common American nation, we really have to be trying to promote that kind of joint responsibility for ourselves and where our country is going. And I think that's one of the benefits, really, of promoting this type of a partnership.
Why do you think that the Jewish Forward called this partnership an unlikely bond?
Again, I have no idea how they came up with that particular line. It seems to me that it's actually a very understandable bond. We are sometimes considered to be in different places in the American story. But when you look beyond the specific years of the mass immigration of Jews and the mass immigration of Latinos, we have so many common elements to our story. Coming to this country to look for opportunity and to support our families here and to support our families in the broader world. And so to me, it's actually a very obvious coming together.
And actually, if we look historically, Latin America served as a place for refuge for many Jews from Eastern Europe, and so people aren't aware of that historical connection with even Jews going to Sosua in Dominican Republic and settling there, and of course the Jewish communities that sprung up in Argentina and in Chile and in Brazil and Venezuela and Colombia. So I think this is something that individuals are not aware of, that there is already a long historical link there.
A big part of our Jewish community and our Latino Jewish community can trace their roots back to Eastern Europe or to Germany or Austria, and they were given refuge in Latin America and now are here as part of our American Jewish story.
And unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Gideon Aronoff and Angela Fernandez, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back.
We all know Haiti was hit by a devastating earthquake.
Tens of thousands of Haitians have died, and that number is rising.
We don't have time to sit around and talk about what we can do to help.
You can help by donating today.
That's our show. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week. In the meantime, be independent-minded.